Good evening, everyone. My name is Duncan MacLeod, and I am Assistant Professor of Composition at the University of Nottingham. In this talk, I'm joined very kindly by Kate Halsall from Galvanise Ensemble and the visual artist Claire Orme. Now, as you can imagine, we are some miles away from one another. I'm currently sat here on campus here in Nottingham, and Claire, I think, is down in Margate, is that right?
Yes, I'm in my very cold studio in Margate.
And Kate is somewhere up north. Whereabouts are you, Kate?
I'm up in Cumbria.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we are reaching out across the regions. Anyway, this talk, we're just going to talk a little bit about a project that we've all been involved in. And that is obviously my work, the Metalization of a Dream. But before I say any more in terms of the composition, it'd be good to hear just a little bit more about Kate and Galvanise Ensemble, and indeed Claire's practice. So let's start with Kate.
Hi, so I'm Kate Halsall. I'm the pianist and manager of Galvanise Ensemble. We're an electroacoustic improvisation based ensemble, obviously now between Cumbria, a bit of Newcastle upon Tyne and London. So we have worked together for about 8-9 years now, and obviously we've worked with Duncan before on a few projects, and with Claire as well. So over the years we've done a whole sort of range of work with you both, improvisation based, and also working with Duncan on different bits of scored material. So I think for us it's been a really interesting challenge this time, because obviously we're in our sort of new lockdown situation, and so it's been a real sort of voyage of discovery putting this together with you.
Great. Thanks, Kate. And Claire, how about you?
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I'm a visual artist. I work across lots of different kind of mediums. I do performance and sound sometimes, and kind of graphics and lots of different things. And yeah, I've done quite a few projects now of Galvanise Ensemble, and each one has been very different. Always very exciting to work with you all. Yeah, and this project's been really interesting, and it's kind of thrown up a lot of new challenges because of obviously the restrictions that have come in this year and everything. So it's been a challenge, but been hopefully very, very exciting, and we're looking forward to everyone seeing what we've made.
No, great. Well, I mean that's one thing probably just to follow up on, is that obviously we were, I say fortunate, we were fortunate in as much that we were able to kind of perform this work live. The initial premiere was back in January 2019 at the Lytton Phil in Newcastle. And we had subsequent performance at City University in London just before COVID hit. And I think for me, it's been, oh yes, a challenge, but also I think kind of looking at ways in which that we've been able to get other performance of the work on online mediums, and with that, I found it to be a very kind of different way of working. Not necessarily a bad thing. I think there has been there has been a number of positives, or just very, very different, dare I say, outcomes in terms of the live, I say acoustic, there's electronics involved in the work, but live in-person performance. But before I kind of jump ahead onto those points, I think it's probably worthwhile just to give a little bit of introduction to the work itself. So the Metalization of a Dream was a commission from Galvanise Ensemble, and that was way back in, I think, the end of, well, around mid-2018. And the premise of the project was very much kind of born on the back of an ongoing project that Galvanise has been running called Happenstance. Now, before I talk about my project, I think it might be worthwhile just checking back with Kate and asking her a bit more about kind of Happenstance. So could you explain what Happenstance means?
Well, I think, yes, we sort of began really working in this sort of particular framework from 2015, when I checked the archive, Duncan, when I was trying to remember. It's been a sort of lots of iterations around this sort of idea of sort of spontaneous responses, I suppose, between the group and with you and working with Claire. So it's kind of this sort of cut-up collage idea, and I suppose opening ourselves up to different influences from fine art, as well as, you know, perhaps within the ensemble itself, and just thinking about the visual influence. So when we were working on it, this obviously was originally back in our Chatham Dockyard days at University of Kent, and you know, we worked with a whole sort of range of composers and different students and all kinds of settings for it as well. So I think from that sort of starting point, we're now here, which was, you know, from what you were saying about the sort of first two performances we managed to fit in before lockdown. Obviously the idea with working with Claire was that it would be a kind of live art response, and we didn't necessarily know what Claire was going to be creating, and how we were going to respond to that was going to be kind of building this improvisation element of the performance each time. So this is really different and just as exciting, and I think that's been really interesting journey as well with Claire.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing, is that I feel that for me, what's been really quite different in terms of how I've approached this particular project, in as much that more often than not, when I'm composing, I'm writing a fully formed composition that's fully notated. And what's different with this particular work, and indeed a lot of the other commissions that are kind of around the Happenstance project with Galvanise, is that the works themselves offer scope to, dare I say, have a more open form. There can be, in some respects, some aleatoric aspects. Now, when I say aleatoric, alea is kind of Latin for dice, so these kind of chance operations. And I think, kind of coming back to the metalization of a dream, when I was initially approached for this project, I was at the time doing a lot of reading around Cage's work with collage techniques. And it's ultimately around the 1950s that Cage discusses this notion of the coexistence of dissimilars. And what that ultimately means is that at that time he was experimenting in his own compositions about juxtaposing wholly unrelated musical materials, in essence working with musical, or dare I say, sonic collages. And he poses a very interesting question, in as much that when bringing these seemingly unrelated materials together, when they're presented side by side or layered against one another, that gives the listener opportunity to kind of take away from that their own individual interpretation. And through that, there is this, dare I say, a relinquishing of control. So coming back to how I would normally compose, having this kind of very fixed composition, notated bar by bar, so on and so forth. In fact, the work is actually comprised currently, and I say currently in as much that I see it very much as an ongoing work in which that I will continue to kind of develop and add new materials. The work itself is actually currently comprised of around 12 or so shorter compositions. And what I do in this piece is that I'm inviting the ensemble Galvanise to select from this kind of catalogue of materials and basically perform these, or dare I say, pre-select a selection of these kind of 12 materials to kind of construct a performance. So I guess in some respects you could call it as a kind of musical Meccano or Lego, that you have these kind of blocks of material, and then what I'm doing is I'm inviting the ensemble to kind of select which one of those they choose to include. They don't need to include all of them, and with that they can, in one option, kind of perform the works in sequence. But what I'm also very keen to explore, and indeed this kind of goes back to John Cage's work with the coexistence of dissimilars, is actually juxtapose these things against one another, or on top of, overlaying, let's say. Again, a similar thing can be found in the visual arts. And had this piece been performed live, indeed, this is something that was explored in the very premiere of the work, was actually to spatially distribute the ensemble. So coming back to Kate's point about what the ensemble has been doing with Claire, of almost kind of having these kind of live art happenings is that the performance, or dare I say the mode of performance, is very different to this kind of concert performance where the audience is sat in the auditorium, the performers are up on the platform. In this kind of more immersive performance, the proscenium arch of the stage, let's say, doesn't exist. And in short, the audience is invited to kind of move around the space. And like I say, with having these works being played simultaneously, one may think, I mean, some may take away from this is it might sound quite a din, but in fact, by spatially separating these things out, it's a very different listening experience. And indeed, by inviting the audience to kind of move around the space, they can ultimately, dare I say, move towards the kind of sounds and the materials that interest them. Now, I've spoken at length there about the piece itself, but I'm quite keen to kind of pull Claire in now, just to kind of talk a bit more about this kind of transformation from the live event to kind of the digital. And just to kind of follow up on that before I bring Claire on is for tonight's performance with NottNOISE New Music Marathon, the film that Claire has put together has been specially commissioned. So we're delighted to have that first airing here from NottNOISE. But I guess the question to Claire here is, could you maybe talk a little bit about this transition from those initial live performances that were done in Newcastle and London, and how that kind of has related to, let's say, now working with film online?
Yeah, so obviously moving from live art to doing something digital is it's a kind of a world away, a kind of what you can kind of achieve and what the audience will experience. And I wanted to somehow still keep that element of live art and keep the element that you're kind of taking the audience on this journey with the musicians, and also kind of bring in elements of the kind of circumstances around us having to create something digital. So the kind of base kind of inspiration came from the Paolozzi collages that the piece is titled after. And one of them is in this kind of strange room with these objects kind of pasted in sort of a strange composition. And I use that as a kind of base for what the kind of structure of the video is. So each kind of performer sort of appears in their kind of own little room, as if they're kind of playing in their own houses, in their own rooms. But I wanted to kind of work out a way of bringing everyone together. So everyone's kind of doing these little bits of this collage, and as you say, these kind of building blocks of the piece, and work out a way to bring everyone to be playing in the same room as we would have been doing if we were playing live. So the video kind of takes everyone on this journey of this kind of whirlwind, strange, abstract, swirly, colourful explosion, where all the musicians are kind of in their own spaces. And as you were saying, in the live performances, kind of spatially, it's very interesting with everyone kind of dotted around. And then everyone comes together and they're kind of in this virtual space together, which I thought was really important when sort of everyone has been kind of perhaps quite lonely performing and videoing themselves, and kind of to create that togetherness digitally, as that's kind of all we can achieve at the moment. But yeah, it's been an amazing project to be working on, and yeah, I'm really excited for everyone to see it. And it will also be really interesting to see how the performers kind of react to seeing themselves performing in this virtual space. And how they kind of can relate to that is going to be quite interesting.
No, great. Well, I think on that point, kind of working with this sense of collage, I should probably just say a couple of words about the materials that feature within the music. So just as Claire had said, the piece itself, the Metalization of a Dream, is actually a title of a collage work by the Scots artist Eduardo Paolozzi, who was a much respected and famed sculptor, but also is heralded as being, dare I say, the UK's pop artist. He worked extensively with collage in the 20th century. In terms of the title, just as a bit of background, like I say, the Metalization of Dream, although a work in itself, was actually a monograph on Paolozzi's early works. And for me, I was immediately drawn to that title. It's kind of a what does it mean? What does metalization of a dream mean? And having done some further research, it's actually kind of found poetry. So Palozzi was working not only with visual collage, but it was also experimenting with collage of text, so cut-up techniques. These are things that are experimented and used to great effect with writers such as William Burroughs, for instance. And this ultimately, I mean, for me, I felt I found some connections here, kind of following on from the kind of happenstance projects with Galvanise Ensemble, this kind of working with the kind of surrealist Dada kind of tropes and inspirations. So in short, I kind of drew upon that title of the work to kind of name this particular work. And this kind of notion of kind of collage and the kind of almost surrealist cut up techniques of sorts kind of are very much embedded into the form and structure of the work. So as I've already discussed, the work itself is comprised of around 12 or so discrete compositions. But within that, I'm also kind of borrowing and drawing upon other pre-existing works, such as the Innomine by the Renaissance composer John Tavener. We also hear some text from Gertrude Stein herself, worked quite extensively with these kind of repetitive, quite surrealist cut-up techniques in her writing. And in addition to that, there are kind of sound sources that kind of relate to the geographical locations in which this particular version of the piece was made. That being, I was very fortunate to have a couple of weeks residency at Britton Piers Arts up in Aldborough. So we hear some kind of wonderful sounds of nature that for me is quite an interesting way of kind of adding a geographic location to the work. And indeed, latter performances has seen kind of local radio feature, and again, kind of puts us a stamp on where the piece is being performed. Now, I'm mindful that time is tight, so I'd like to thank Claire and Kate for joining me. And yes, do tune in. The stream goes out at 9, and the video will be available to watch through until early January. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.